You think you're free. You wake up when you want. Choose what to eat. Wear what you like. Speak your mind. But what if I told you that your freedom is an illusion? That your choices have already been decided before you even make them? Michel Foucault didn't just study power. He exposed its most terrifying trick. Control without chains, prisons without walls. He showed us that society doesn't dominate you through violence. It shapes your thoughts, so you obey without resistance. You were trained from childhood to follow rules, to fear judgment, to please authority. Not by force, but through discipline. Schools taught you obedience under the guise of education. Sit straight, ask permission, walk in lines. These weren't just routines, they were rehearsals for adult life. You learned how to conform, not how to think freely. And just when you thought you escaped, workplaces replaced classrooms. Offices became the new institutions. Surveillance disguised as productivity tools. Performance reviews became modern-day interrogations. You smile when you're dying inside. You obey even when no one is watching. Because the system doesn't need to beat you. It just needs you to believe that punishment is everywhere. That's the panopticon. A prison design Foucault used as a metaphor for society itself. A circular prison with a central watchtower. Inmates never know when they're being watched, so they behave at all times. Sound familiar? Cameras on every corner, tracking apps in every phone, a digital gaze that never blinks. But the real genius of the panopticon isn't the surveillance, it's the internalization. Eventually, prisoners stop needing guards. They start policing themselves. And that's you. You monitor your thoughts, censor your own voice, obey rules you never agreed to. Society made you a soldier of your own imprisonment. And here's the worst part. You didn't even notice it happening. You thought you were evolving, being responsible, becoming a good citizen. But what if you were just being tamed, groomed to be efficient, agreeable, compliant? This isn't conspiracy. It's control, refined over centuries. You've been shaped by invisible hands into something predictable, manageable, obedient. And the longer you stay asleep to it, the tighter the grip becomes. Foucault warned us, but were we listening? Or were we already too deep inside the cage to see the bars? This is just the beginning. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Foucault didn't believe that power was just something kings or politicians held. It was everywhere, in everything, embedded in the most ordinary parts of your life. That's what makes it so dangerous. Power today doesn't strike with swords or chains. It whispers through expectations, routines, and norms. Discipline became the new weapon, not to break your body, but to mold your behavior. And the terrifying part? You welcomed it. Discipline works not through fear, but through repetition. It teaches you to regulate yourself before anyone else does. Think of how you were trained to sit still, stay quiet, follow orders, long before you even knew why. You weren't just learning how to function, you were being programmed to obey. And once you internalize discipline, the external punishments aren't even necessary. You carry the rules inside you. You flinch at the thought of disapproval. You scold yourself before anyone else can. You self-correct, self-monitor, self-repress. Discipline isn't about chaos or pain. It's about precision. It's about shaping you into a predictable unit that serves the system efficiently. And it starts early. Schools aren't built for learning, they're designed for control. Bells tell you when to speak. Desks teach you to stay in place. Grades train you to chase approval. Uniforms strip away individuality. You're rewarded for obedience, punished for deviation. The lesson is clear: fit in or fall behind. And when you finally graduate to the real world, the training doesn't stop. It just gets more subtle. Your boss doesn't scream at you. He evaluates your performance. Your coworkers don't report you. They remind you of company culture. Your time is sliced into meetings, deadlines, and deliverables. Every moment accounted for, every behavior measured. The more efficient you are, the more imprisoned you become. Foucault called this docile bodies. Humans shaped to be useful, compliant, and controllable. You become a machine in the factory of society, proud of your productivity, blind to your chains. And here's the most insidious part. You start to crave the structure, the approval, the gold stars and promotions. You confuse discipline with purpose, obedience with virtue. But discipline doesn't make you free. It makes you manageable. It doesn't inspire greatness, it manufactures conformity. The question isn't whether you're disciplined, it's who you're being disciplined for and why. You think you're in control of your life. But what if your entire identity was forged in the furnace of someone else's design? What if the life you're living isn't even yours? Imagine a prison where the guard never has to shout, never has to strike, never even has to appear. Just one watchtower, placed in the center of a circular structure. The prisoners can't see the guard, but they know they're being watched, or at least they think they are. So they behave, they obey, they regulate themselves. That's the panopticon, Jeremy Bentham's 18th century design. But Foucault saw something far more sinister in it. He realized that the panopticon wasn't just a prison, it was a metaphor for modern society. Because once you believe you're always being observed, you no longer need to be punished. You become your own jailer. You enforce the rules without anyone needing to tell you. And that's exactly how society controls you. Quietly, invisibly, efficiently. Today's surveillance isn't just about cameras. It's about expectations, metrics, feedback loops. You don't need a warden when you've got social media, performance reviews, and peer pressure. You don't need bars when your mind is already wired to fear judgment. That fear shapes everything. What you wear, how you speak, what you post, who you become. You live under the illusion of freedom, all while adjusting yourself for the invisible gaze. You smile for the algorithm. You edit your thoughts. You curate your identity. You perform constantly, not because someone told you to, but because you've internalized the watcher. The panopticon is no longer a building, it's a psychological condition. And the most chilling part, you carry it with you everywhere, in your pocket, in your home, in your mind. You are seen, scored, compared. Your value becomes externalized. Likes, views, followers, productivity. You measure yourself through the eyes of others. And in doing so, you forget how to live for yourself. You censor your soul to remain acceptable. You shrink your truth to remain safe. But this safety is an illusion. You're not protected. You're pacified. Controlled not through violence, but through your own compliance. Foucault warned that modern power works not by crushing the body, but by colonizing the mind. It doesn't need to beat you. It just needs you to believe you're being watched. And once that belief takes hold, you'll do the rest of the work for them. You'll obey, and you'll thank them for it. You were never given a choice. From the moment you were born, the world began molding you, not through force, but through normalization. Michel Foucault described it as one of the most subtle and terrifying forms of power. Society doesn't command you with whips or chains. It whispers expectations into your ear. It defines what is normal, and then silently punishes what isn't. And once you internalize that idea, you stop questioning and start correcting yourself. Not because you're bad, but because you want to fit in. You want to belong. You want to be normal. But here's the dark truth. Normal is a weapon. It's not objective. It's manufactured, designed, policed. Normal tells you what's beautiful, what's successful, what's valuable. And when you inevitably fall short of it because the standard is always shifting, you don't resist. You self-correct. You diet. You hustle. You smile. You hide your pain. You modify yourself until there's barely anything left that was ever truly you. And that's the genius of normalization. It doesn't just tell you who you should be, it makes you want to be that person, even if it means destroying who you really are. Think about school. Grades, behavior, dress codes. You're not just learning math, you're learning obedience. You're being trained to meet invisible standards, to be ranked, evaluated, and approved. And if you don't meet the norm, you're shamed, diagnosed, corrected. The same applies to work, relationships, even your private thoughts. You're expected to have the right opinions, the right emotions, the right goals. Anything else makes you abnormal, and abnormality carries a price. Isolation, judgment, rejection. So you adapt, you pretend, you silence the parts of yourself that don't align with the norm. Kill your truth to be accepted. What exactly are you being accepted into? There comes a point when society no longer needs to watch you because you've already internalized its gaze. You carry it with you, like a shadow stitched to your spine. Foucault called it the panopticon, a prison where inmates never know when they're being watched, so they behave as if they always are. But here's the terrifying twist. Our world is a panopticon. And you're both the prisoner and the guard. You monitor your thoughts, your behavior, your desires. You punish yourself before anyone else ever gets the chance. This is how control evolves, not through brute force, but through self-discipline. You learn to surveil yourself, to modify yourself, to regulate your own instincts to fit a mold you didn't choose. You tell yourself you're being responsible, that you're just being realistic. But you're not. You're being watched by the version of society that now lives inside you. Every time you hesitate to speak your truth, every time you second-guess your passion, every time you silence a part of yourself to stay acceptable, you are policing yourself. You are keeping yourself obedient. And the cage is no longer around you, it's within you. You become afraid of your own freedom because you've been trained to believe freedom is dangerous, that it's selfish, that it's irrational. So you shrink. You edit yourself in conversations. You laugh at jokes that make you feel small. You say yes when every part of your soul is screaming no. Not because someone forced you, but because your internal warden decided it was safer that way. This is the most efficient form of control. When you become the instrument of your own suppression, when your identity becomes a surveillance device. Foucault understood that power works best when it's invisible, when it disguises itself as morality, as discipline, as maturity. So you don't rebel, you comply. You don't resist, you rationalize. You don't notice the bars, because you've painted them to look like boundaries. The worst prison is not the one made of walls and steel. It's the one you can't see, the one you defend, the one you've come to believe is your own choice. But ask yourself, if your freedom had to be killed for that choice to exist, was it ever really yours? Obedience doesn't begin with chains, it begins with shame. With a quiet whisper that tells you your instincts are wrong, that your desires are dangerous, that your anger is ugly. So before you ever rebel, you learn to feel bad for wanting to rebel. Society doesn't just control your actions, it hijacks your emotions. From a young age, you are taught that being good means being obedient, and being obedient means suppressing what is raw, wild, and untamed inside you. You're told to be polite when you want to scream, to forgive when you want to protect yourself, to smile when you feel like crying. This is not kindness. This is conditioning. This is moral engineering disguised as virtue. And it works because it uses the most powerful weapon of all, guilt. Guilt makes you betray yourself and call it integrity. It makes you bow to authority and call it humility. It makes you surrender your truth and call it maturity. But it's not maturity. It's emotional manipulation. Foucault would say that this is the refinement of power. It doesn't crush you. It convinces you that you deserve to be crushed, that your suffering is noble, that your silence is strength, that your compliance is a moral duty. And you believe it. You repeat it. You teach it to your children. Because this morality is not based on truth. It's based on control. It's not about right or wrong. It's about what keeps the structure intact. And the structure survives by making sure you doubt yourself, by making sure your conscience is shaped in the image of obedience. So now, even when you're alone, you feel guilty for dreaming too big, for saying no, for putting yourself first. That's not your conscience speaking. That's the echo of society's voice in your head. You think you're free, but your morality has been weaponized against you. You can't rebel because rebellion feels immoral. You can't change because change feels selfish. You can't live fully because living fully feels wrong. But what if that's the lie? What if the guilt you feel is not your soul speaking, but your conditioning choking it? The fear of being judged, rejected, or even seen as different becomes the lens through which you view your actions. This isn't just about conforming to social norms. It's about you policing yourself, making sure you are always in line with the expectations society has set for you. Every time you adjust your behavior to avoid judgment, every time you censor your thoughts to fit in, every time you suppress a desire because it might cause discomfort to others, you're reinforcing the panopticon. The very idea that someone might be watching, judging, and measuring your worth makes you take control of your own behavior. You stop yourself from speaking out, from taking risks, from being unapologetically you. But this internal surveillance system isn't a natural part of your being. It's learned. It's taught to you by the institutions, the culture, and the people who benefit from your compliance. They don't need to force you into submission. They just need to plant the seed that you should be ashamed of being anything other than what they expect you to be. So, you start watching yourself constantly, making sure your actions fit within the narrowly defined boundaries of acceptable behavior. This becomes your new reality. You start to feel that any deviation from this self-imposed standard is a failure. You begin to view your own thoughts with suspicion. Your creativity, your individuality, your desires, anything outside of conformity is rejected or hidden, not because it's wrong, but because you've learned to distrust it. The result? You don't need a physical prison to keep you contained. You're already trapped inside your own mind, self-regulating, self-monitoring, self-censoring. You've become both the prisoner and the guard. And the worst part? You're not even aware of it. This invisible cage is so ingrained in you that it feels like freedom. But true freedom comes when you break this cycle and reclaim your autonomy from the self-surveillance that society has implanted in your psyche. In a world where conformity is the norm, the power of normalization can be one of the most dangerous forces working against your individuality. Society doesn't need to force you into submission through fear alone. Instead, it plants the idea that everyone else is doing it, and therefore, you should too. This collective behavior creates an invisible pressure that leads you to adopt the same mindset, the same patterns, the same ideologies as the majority. The problem with this is that once something is normalized, it becomes nearly impossible to challenge. You begin to view any deviation from the norm as abnormal, rebellious, or even dangerous. But here's the catch. What is normal isn't inherent. It's constructed. It's shaped by the systems that control the flow of information, the media you consume, and the environments you are a part of. These forces create a standard of living that, over time, you accept without question. And once you internalize this normalization, you stop seeing it as a social construct. It becomes your reality, and the more you align with it, the less you question it. The boundaries of normality keep expanding, and so, you find yourself adapting to new standards without realizing how far you've strayed from your authentic self. You may have grown up in a world where you were taught to believe certain things were just the way it is, whether it's about your career, your relationships, or your own worth. But who decided that this is the right way? Society did. And because it's all around you, it becomes difficult to see beyond it. This invisible force is so powerful that you start comparing your worth against it. You begin to judge others by these same standards, and even feel guilty when you don't meet them. In the process, you slowly erase the individuality that once defined you. When you embrace the norms without challenge, you become just another cog in the machine. You stop asking why, and start asking, how can I fit in? The tragedy is that in conforming to the expectations set by others, you lose touch with who you truly are and what you really want. This is the brilliance of normalization. It doesn't force you into obedience. It simply makes you think your obedience is the only natural thing to do. Imagine a world where you don't need to be constantly watched or monitored for control to be exerted over you, around with a clipboard to monitor your behavior. You do it yourself. It starts with the internalization of external expectations. From a young age, you are taught to judge yourself according to societal standards, whether it's about how you look, how you perform, or how you interact with others. The pressure to fit in and conform is so deeply ingrained that you don't need anyone to tell you when you've stepped out of line. You already know. This self-surveillance becomes second nature. You start censoring your thoughts, your actions, your desires, even your dreams, based on what you believe will be accepted or valued. The constant internal gaze keeps you in check, ensuring that you don't act too differently, don't speak too loudly, don't stand out too much. The result is a kind of self-discipline that makes you feel like you're always under a microscope, even when you're alone. In the digital age, this effect is amplified. Social media platforms are the perfect example of how surveillance has become self-imposed. You monitor your every move, curating the version of yourself that you think will be most palatable to others. Every post, every like, every comment is an act of self-surveillance, one that's subtle, nudges you to conform to the expectations of your online community. It creates a sense of constant performance, where you're always aware of how you're being perceived. It's a form of control that you voluntarily accept, because it feels like freedom. But the truth is, you're never really free. You are constantly adjusting to what you believe will earn you approval, validation, or acceptance. The panopticon isn't just in prisons or factories. It's in your mind, it's in your habits, it's in every choice you make without even realizing it. Now that we understand how deeply the mechanisms of control have infiltrated our daily lives, we must face the uncomfortable reality that the illusion of freedom is precisely what keeps us obedient. You might believe that you are living life on your terms, choosing your career, your relationships, your desires. But in reality, those choices are heavily influenced, shaped, and even dictated by the structures around you. Foucault argues that modern society, through its institutions and norms, doesn't just control your body physically, it controls your very perception of reality. The idea of freedom becomes an internalized concept, one that tricks you into thinking that what you want is truly your own. The truth is, many of the desires you chase are not born from within. They're a direct result of societal influence. From the products you buy to the career paths you pursue, to even the way you define success. These are all norms that have been embedded into your psyche from the moment you were born. The most alarming part? You've bought into it without even questioning it. This internalization of control leads to a paradox. Though you may feel like you're free, you're actually living in a deeply regulated state. It's a quiet form of coercion. You obey without realizing that you're being controlled. The so-called freedom we think we have is actually the freedom to make choices within the parameters set by society. But here's the catch. These parameters are so naturalized, so invisible, that we don't even recognize them as constraints. You're not confined by iron bars. You're confined by ideas, expectations, and norms that you've internalized so completely that they seem like truths. When you begin to truly question what you desire versus what you've been taught to desire, the illusion starts to crack. Freedom, in its truest sense, comes from the ability to see the cage you've been placed in, and the courage to break out of it. But to do that, you first have to recognize that you're not as free as you think you are. And the journey to breaking free starts with self-awareness, a painful yet necessary first step toward reclaiming your autonomy from the invisible forces that control you. This marks the end of our journey through Foucault's concept of control and obedience. It's up to you to decide. Will you continue to follow the norms set by society, or will you break free and live authentically? The choice, as always, is yours, but only once you recognize how society has shaped your perceptions of freedom.